2019 presidential order is a very, very sweeping one. It removed special status of Jammu and Kashmir. So we are going to discuss the legality or constitutionality of this presidential ordinance. For this, we need to know what actually this Article 370. Okay. Let us discuss 370 provisions and constraints of 370 and how constraints overcome, and then recent pivot. Okay. 370 is the one that links India and Jammu and Kashmir. 370 defines the relationship. Okay. You can say this is equivalent to constitution, constitutional arrangement between India and Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, like what is constitution to India, 370 and its own constitution, Jammu and Kashmir's own constitution, are fundamental to Jammu and Kashmir. So let us look at the provisions of 370. See, 370 provisions divide subjects into IOA subjects and non-IOA subjects. IOA subjects refer to foreign affairs, communications and defense. IOA is the instrument of accession. When Maharaja signed an instrument of accession, he gave up sovereignty on these three subjects: foreign affairs and communication and defense. So 370 is an effort to make Jammu and Kashmir as independent as possible outside IOA subjects. Okay. So let us look at these provisions. 371B1 and 2. It says, put together, Parliament can pass laws in relation to Jammu and Kashmir in IOA subjects with consultation of Jammu and Kashmir government. So in IOA subjects with consultation. Whereas in non-IOA subjects with concurrence of Jammu and Kashmir government. Concurrence means Jammu and Kashmir government should agree. Whereas consultation means you are just consulting. Okay. So concurrence is it gives more power to Jammu and Kashmir government. And 371D says provisions of the constitution can be applied, Indian constitution can be applied in relation to Jammu and Kashmir in IOA subjects with consultation of Jammu and Kashmir government, in non-IOA subjects with concurrence of Jammu and Kashmir government. Okay. So this says how Parliament can pass laws and constitutional provisions can be applied, consultation as well as concurrence. So this is the split up. So this mentions Jammu and gives importance to Jammu and Kashmir government. But 370 says Jammu and Kashmir government is not final. This is the finality. The Constituent Assembly of Jammu and Kashmir is final. 372 says Constituent Assembly should approve finally what is approved by Jammu and Kashmir government. And 373 says special status can be ended only with Constituent Assembly's recommendation. So the structure is that certain things by the government, Jammu and Kashmir government, but in the end, Constituent Assembly. Okay. But the problem is this Constituent Assembly was formed in 1951 and dissolved in 1957. Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir came into effect on 1957 January 26th. And so Constituent Assembly dissolved. Okay. So Parliament can pass laws, constitutional provisions can be applied, but they have to be approved by Constituent Assembly, and Constituent Assembly is not there after 57. So how can a relationship between India and Jammu and Kashmir be changed when Constituent Assembly is not there? Is an issue. So there are actually no provisions. Okay. So this particular fact is looked at by people to suggest that what Constituent Assembly passed is final. It means very rigid arrangement. Okay. So let us look at various views. For example, okay, can special status be? Nehru said, it is not perfectly clear matter from the legal point of view how far President can issue notifications under 370 several times. So notifications to amend the relationship between India and Jammu and Kashmir are being issued under presidential ordinances. But Nehru himself said it is not clear whether special status can be amended through presidential ordinances several times. And Rajendra Prasad said, Rajendra Prasad, who was the first president and also a lawyer, says that special status cannot be modified from time to time as occasion required. And A.G. Noorani thinks no amendment can be made to special status since Constituent Assembly is not there. So 370 defines relationship. It says Constituent Assembly has the last word and Constituent Assembly no more in after 57. So what India was doing was series of presidential ordinances. But then the presidential ordinance needed to be approved by Constituent Assembly, which was not there. So what India did was, many presidential ordinances are passed and many constitutional provisions applied. But the way it did was, There was one 1954 PO. This was passed by Constituent Assembly. So India, instead of passing new presidential ordinances, replacing the 1954, they were new presidential ordinances, they were making amendments, modifications to this 1954. 1954 was passed by Constituent Assembly. Okay, is that legal or not is debatable. Just because 1954 one was passed, how can assume that all amendments to this can be said to have been passed by Constituent Assembly? So, amendment to special status is a very tricky legal issue without any clarity. Okay. One international expert on constitutional law has this to say: presidential orders have amended rather than replaced the 1954 order, possibly in recognition of the doubts over the constitutionality of the repeated 370 orders. Jill Cottrell, an international expert on the constitutional law, in this article, Kashmir, the Vanishing Autonomy. Because so much of Indian constitution was applied through amendments to 1954 PO. Finally, so many provisions, it was like this. Out of 97 subjects in the union list, 94 applied to Jammu and Kashmir. Out of 12 schedules, 7. Out of 395 articles, 260 applied. You may think there are many provisions of the Indian Constitution not applied, but they happen, many other provisions are not applied because Jammu and Kashmir Constitution also is similar to Indian. So there was no need to apply more than what were applied because of the similarity. Because Jammu and Kashmir Constitution is framed along the similar lines of Indian Constitution. So, so many changes were going on. India was not sure whether those changes were legal, constitutional. So this was controversial because 370 gave a kind of a frozen arrangement. Okay. So now coming to the recent order. When all along the legal issue of whether any amendments to special status can be made or not were not settled, 2019 presidential order makes one very sweeping amendment. It says why all these problems with constitutional assembly when it was not there anymore. So it simply says, let us make state legislature as an equivalent to constituent assembly. Okay. How can state legislature ever be equal to constituent assembly? Constituent assembly gives the nature and the terms and functioning of the state legislature. In no country, constituent assembly and state legislature are equal. Okay. But then this simply says, why all this debate about constituent assembly? Make constituent assembly, make state legislature take the state legislature as constituent assembly. But where is this amendment made? Constituent assembly is mentioned in 370. But 370 is not supposed to be amended by Indian Constitution. So amendment procedure to Indian Constitution is not applicable to 370 amendment. So what present government did was, instead of amending 370, they amended 367. 367 is a provision where certain terms are explained to facilitate understanding of the Constitution. So in 367, they said state legislature can be taken as a constituent assembly. So in 370, accordingly, then the constituent assembly will be equal to state legislature. So the point here is that when you can't amend 370, how can you amend 367? Supreme Court said that what you cannot amend directly, you can't amend indirectly. So when you can't amend 370, you can't amend 367. And more importantly, making a state legislature equivalent to constituent assembly is too sweeping. Okay. So this is one issue that whose legality can be questioned. Can state legislature be equated with constituent assembly? And the second thing is, when you can't amend 370, can you amend 367? This is legality too. Okay. But then, so in the place of constituent assembly, they made state legislature. But then when 2019 presidential order is being passed, there is no state legislature also. So how do you get over that problem? Because Jammu and Kashmir was under president's rule. So here they said, when state legislature is not there, then governor can be taken as recommendation of the state legislature. Recommendation of the governor can be taken as recommendation of the state legislature. How is this possible at all? It's just meaningless. In a federal arrangement, state legislature is of the state and the governor is appointed by the center. So Jammu and Kashmir governor is appointed by the center and state legislature is elected by the people. How can state legislature and governor be equal? How can how can recommendation of the governor be taken as a recommendation of the state legislature? Okay. And what did this governor recommend? Special status to be removed. So which means these are all the series of the steps. Constituent assembly, what is constituent assembly is that role is given to state legislature, and what is state legislature supposed to do is given to the governor, and governor recommends the president, and then president. See, how can there be equality across these institutions? Okay. It is true that under certain circumstances, governor makes certain recommendations when there is no state legislature, but they are on certain important and temporary matters, urgent. Okay. And removal of special status cannot be an urgent matter. So linking this is another issue. So making state legislature's recommendation as governor's recommendation. This is the another issue. Okay. So now that governor recommends that all the provisions of the constitution are applied under 370. 370 is not removed. See, presidential order there is no removal of 370 because 370 is the link between India and Jammu and Kashmir. But instead, using 370, all the provisions of the constitution are applied. All provisions apply. In applying all provisions, special status gone. In applying all the provisions, special status gone. Not that 370 is removed. Okay. And then next step is when all the provisions are applied, all the provisions are applied means one very powerful provision also can be applied, Article 3. And Article 3 empowers Union government, empowers the Parliament to bifurcate or trifurcate a state. So because all the provisions are applied, now Article 3 is applied to reduce Jammu and Kashmir to union territories. Jammu and Kashmir Union Territory with legislature and Ladakh Union Territory without legislature. But there is one more issue here. Article 3 says that state legislature should pass a resolution giving agreeing or not agreeing. State legislature should debate. But again, there was no state legislature. And here they said, in the president's rule, when the state legislature is not there, so state legislature function can be done by Parliament. This is what they said. So it means Parliament only approves. But how can state legislature and Parliament be equal again? So anyway, I would say this is less important because Article 3 does not require that the state legislature should approve. Article 3 only requires that the state legislature should debate, discuss, pass a resolution. But it is not mandatory that it should approve. But essentially, all the central government institutions are used. So next thing is that how can Parliament do the function of state legislature for the resolution on the application of Article 3? So all the central government institutions of Parliament, President, Parliament and Governor are used, and where is federalism, where is the special status? So this raises very serious issues of legality. Okay. But what is the net impact of all these things? Net impact is that from state to union territory is a huge down, is one. And state with a special status to union territory is worse. But then in so many ways the special status is eroded. Okay. But when so so much of provisions are already applied and special status is eroded, and why should there be any complaint about removal of special status now? Because there is some very, very important thing. It is not just union territory status. There is something very important, that is previously through 1954 PO, they made a constitutional provision, constitution in 35A constitutional provision, which said that there are permanent residents of Jammu and Kashmir, permanent residents who can, with certain special rights. Okay. Now, when all the provisions are applied, it becomes similar to all other states, which means there is no concept of permanent provisions, permanent residents, no 35A. So it becomes like any other state where with certain sweeping implications. See, no more permanent residents have these rights to buy land, to own property in Jammu and Kashmir, to vote and to contest elections. And only they are eligible for scholarship and government jobs. So basically it is a kind of citizenship of Jammu and Kashmir, though India believes technically in one citizenship, but this is like a different kind of citizenship. Okay, but of course these arrangements are not exclusive to Jammu and Kashmir. Some scheduled areas have, certain northeastern states have this. Not in all the provisions, but at different level. But go through this provision to buy land and to own property, and also so only permanent residents to vote and to contest makes that political system is exclusively of Jammu and Kashmir people. To buy land and to own property also essentially makes them think that it is theirs. Now with these provisions gone, people can go and settle there, which means demography can be changed. Change of demography is what China did to Tibet. Okay, so demography can be changed because there are no special rights to permanent residents. There is no concept of permanent resident. So it is not that the state became union territory, but the rights taken away to those who are regarded as residents of Jammu and Kashmir is a very sweeping provision, where its demography is under threat, and which means its identity is under threat. So this is a very, very sweeping provision. But so is it helpful? Does it contribute to solution? I don't think so. This is in the direction of making the problem worse. Okay. This is similar to, it is like this. Somebody is complaining that there is domestic violence. And the government says, you think domestic violence is wrong because there is a law against domestic violence, and so remove the law. So Kashmiri people are complaining that they don't have enough autonomy. And the government says, you think you deserve autonomy because of these provisions, and so remove them. Without looking at the history of the problem. Okay. So we should be going in the direction of peaceful resolution of Jammu and Kashmir conflict using Musharraf formula with cooperation with Pakistan. So this is surely not the way. It only complicates matters. But as I said, even now, Musharraf formula can be applied and we can move towards peace.